The dull thrumming of mechanical systems had always been Jules Rennes' lullaby. As the chief systems engineer aboard Orbital Research Station Epsilon, he found comfort in the rhythmic pulse of oxygen recyclers, the gentle whir of gravity stabilizers, and the occasional click of pressure valves adjusting to the vacuum of space. After 3 years stationed above the swirling amber clouds of the gas giant Hyperion, with its magnificent crystalline rings glittering in the light of dual suns, Jules had learned to prefer the company of machines to most of his human colleagues. Vitals indicate elevated cortisol levels. Engineer Wren, would you like me to adjust the ambient temperature? The station's AI assistant, Nora, materialized as a small holographic projection near his workstation. I'm fine, Nora. Just concentrating. Jules brushed a hand through his perpetually disheveled dark hair, eyes never leaving the complex schematic floating before him. The upcoming diplomatic delegation had the entire station in an uproar, and Commander Harrow had tasked him with ensuring every system operated at peak efficiency. No pressure. The Niari delegation has docked. Commander Harrow requests your presence in the reception hall in 20 minutes. Jules groaned. Why me? I'm not part of the welcome committee. As chief systems engineer, your presence is required to address any technical concerns regarding station compatibility with Niari physiology. Also, Commander Harrow specifically mentioned that you, and I quote, need to remember what other sentient beings look like. Hilarious. Jules swiped the schematic closed and pushed himself out of his chair. In the reduced gravity of his engineering bay, the movement sent him gliding toward the exit. Tell Harrow I'll be there. The reception hall had been transformed from its usual sterile utility into something attempting diplomatic grandeur. Holographic banners displaying both Earth's United Nations emblem and the flowing melodic script of the Niari Confederation hung from the curved ceiling. Every available staff member stood at attention, dressed in their formal uniforms, a sea of navy and silver against the station's white walls. Jules tugged at his collar, uncomfortable in the rarely worn formal attire. He positioned himself at the far corner, hoping to remain unnoticed. As the massive airlock doors parted with a ceremonial hiss, Jules couldn't help but feel a flutter of genuine curiosity. Humanity's first diplomatic exchange with the Niari had been initiated only 5 years ago, and information about the species remained limited in public networks. Commander Harrow stepped forward, her posture impeccable. On behalf of Earth's United Space Initiative, I welcome the representatives of the Niari Confederation to Orbital Research Station Epsilon. The beings that glided through the airlock moved with a fluid grace that immediately suggested an evolutionary history different from humanity's, taller than the average human by nearly a foot. The 3 Niari delegates possessed an elongated physique with 4 multi-jointed arms. Their skin shimmered with an iridescent quality that reminded Jules of mother of pearl, shifting between pale blue and lavender depending on how the light struck them. Where human ears would be, delicate fin-like structures extended outward, rippling subtly with each sound in the room. But it was their eyes that captured Jules' attention, large, almond-shaped, and a luminous gold that seemed to contain depth beyond their physical dimensions. They wore flowing garments that appeared to be woven from something like liquid silk, adorned with intricate patterns that might have been decorative or symbolic. Jules couldn't tell. The tallest of the 3 stepped forward. When it spoke, the translator embedded in Jules's ear converted the melodic tones into English, though he could still hear the underlying harmonics of their native speech. We bring harmonious intentions from the Confederation of Niari Worlds. I am Ambassador Verin Talmosa, accompanied by Cultural Attaché Kiron Del Sona and our xenolinguistics specialist, Aya Invasanari. Jules found his gaze drawn to the third delegate, the one introduced as Aya. She appeared slightly younger than her companions, her movements more animated, her attention darting curiously around the reception hall rather than maintaining the serene focus of the others. While the ambassador spoke, Aya's golden eyes scanned the assembled humans. And for a brief, heart-stopping moment, her gaze met Jules's. He quickly looked away, cursing the heat that rose to his face. What was wrong with him? He'd seen pictures of the Nyari before. This shouldn't be any different from meeting any other dignitary. Commander Harrow proceeded with introductions of the senior staff. When she reached Jules, she gestured him forward. And this is our Chief Systems Engineer, Jules Wren, who ensures our station remains operational and compatible with Nyari environmental needs. Jules stepped forward, giving what he hoped was a respectful nod. Welcome to Epsilon Station. Ambassador Verin inclined his head, but it was Aya who spoke, her translated voice carrying a melodic quality that the translation software couldn't quite flatten. Engineer Wren, I look forward to discussing the resonance frequencies of your propulsion systems. They produce a most intriguing harmonic pattern. Jules blinked, surprised. You can hear our propulsion systems? A ripple passed through the delicate fin-like structures at the sides of her head. The Nyari sense resonance across a much broader spectrum than humans. Your engines speak quite eloquently. Her mouth curved into what Jules assumed was a smile. That's fascinating. I'd be happy to show you the engineering bay sometime. Ambassador Verin made a subtle gesture, and Aya stepped back, though her eyes remained on Jules for a moment longer than seemed necessary. The formal introductions continued, but Jules found his attention repeatedly drawn to the xenolinguist. There was something about her, an energy, a curiosity that seemed to radiate from her, that he found utterly captivating. As the reception transitioned to a more informal gathering, Jules retreated to his preferred position against the wall, observing. The station's botanist, Mari, sidled up beside him, offering a glass of something blue. Not your scene, huh, Wren? Jules accepted the drink with a grateful nod. Is it that obvious? You look like you're calculating the fastest escape route. Mari sipped her own drink. But I noticed you weren't exactly avoiding eye contact with the xenolinguist. I was being polite. Jules muttered, Sure. Mari grinned. For what it's worth, I think she was watching you too. Before Jules could formulate a response, Mari had moved away, leaving him to contemplate her words. His eyes drifted back to Aya, who was now engaged in conversation with Dr. Hironi, the station's chief medical officer. Something about the way she moved, the subtle rippling of those auditory fins, the animated gestures of her 4 hands as she spoke. It was mesmerizing. She's so beautiful, Jules whispered to himself. So softly he could barely hear his own voice over the ambient noise of the reception. I wonder if she'd marry me. It was a ridiculous thought, the kind of absurd hyperbole that occasionally crossed his mind, like imagining what he'd name a pet asteroid or how he'd redecorate the commander's quarters given the chance. Just a fleeting, nonsensical fancy with no connection to reality, except that Aya suddenly turned, her golden eyes locking directly with his across the room. The fins at the sides of her head flared slightly, and Jules felt a cold weight settle in his stomach as she excused herself from Dr. Hironi and began moving in his direction. Nora. Jules whispered urgently to his communicator. What's the range of Niari auditory perception? The AI's voice came through his earpiece. Niari can detect sound waves ranging from 10 Hz to 150,000 Hz, far exceeding human capabilities. Additionally, they can sense vibrational resonance through specialized organs that... Can they hear a whisper from across a room? A pause. Affirmative. Particularly if the frequency resonates with their emotional perception spectrum. Jules felt the blood drain from his face as Aya approached. Her movement so fluid, she seemed to glide across the floor. "Engineer Wren," she said, her translated voice carrying that same melodic quality. "Your resonance pattern shifted dramatically just now. Are you experiencing distress?" No, I'm fine. Just the crowd. Not really my element." Aya tilted her head, the motion bird-like in its precision. "I understand. Large social gatherings create complex resonance patterns that can be overwhelming." She paused, those golden eyes studying him intently. "Your earlier whisper, it contained an interesting harmonic overlay." Jules nearly choked on his drink. "You heard that?" "Of course." The emotional resonance was particularly clear. The fin-like structures at the sides of her head rippled slightly. In Niari culture, such resonance is considered a form of truth-speaking. The emotional signature cannot be falsified. Jules wanted nothing more than for the station's floor to open beneath him and eject him into the vacuum of space. "I apologize if I caused any offense. It was just an idle thought, not meant to be heard." "No offense was taken," Aya replied, her head tilting again. "In fact, I found the resonance pattern intriguing. It contained harmonics I haven't encountered in human speech before." Before Jules could formulate a response that might salvage his dignity, Commander Harrow's voice cut through the reception hall, announcing the commencement of the formal dinner. Saved by protocol. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion another time," Aya suggested. "I would very much like to explore the acoustic properties of your engineering bay, as you offered." "Of course," Jules managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'll have Nora coordinate with your schedule." As Aya moved away to join her fellow delegates, Jules released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. What had just happened? She'd heard him, of course she had, with her superior auditory capabilities, but she hadn't seemed offended or disturbed by his inappropriate comment. If anything, she seemed interested. "I detect elevated heart rate and perspiration. Engineer Wren." Nora's voice came through his earpiece. "Shall I add extreme social awkwardness to your medical file?" "Shut up, Nora!" The next morning found Jules buried in work, deliberately losing himself in the complex mathematics of propulsion efficiency to avoid thinking about the previous evening's mortification. He'd managed to get through the formal dinner without further embarrassment, largely by focusing intently on his food and speaking only when directly addressed. The Niari delegates had retired to their specially prepared quarters, and Jules had hoped for at least a few days to recover his equilibrium before having to face Aya again. Fate, it seemed, had other plans. Engineer Wren. Nora's holographic form materialized beside his workstation. Xenolinguist Aya Invasa Nari requests access to the engineering bay for acoustic analysis. Jules nearly dropped the calibration tool he was holding. "Now?" "Affirmative. She is currently waiting at entry point Alpha 7. Jules glanced around the engineering bay in panic. It wasn't particularly untidy. He ran a tight operation. But he suddenly wished he'd had warning to prepare. For what? He wasn't entirely sure. "Fine, let her in." The door hissed open, and Aya entered, her tall form gliding with that characteristic fluid grace. Today she wore simpler attire than at the reception. A form-fitting jumpsuit of silvery material that reminded Jules of Mercury, with sections that appeared almost translucent, revealing the shimmering iridescence of her skin beneath. "Engineer Wren." She greeted him, all four hands moving in a complex pattern that might have been a formal gesture. "I hope I'm not interrupting crucial work." Jules set down his tools and pushed himself to his feet, grateful for the reduced gravity that made his nervous movements less obvious. "Not at all. I was just running some routine calibrations." Aya's golden eyes took in the engineering bay, her auditory fins rippling continuously. "Fascinating. The resonance patterns are even more complex here than I anticipated." She moved toward the central propulsion control console, her head tilting as if listening to something beyond human perception. "Your engines produce a harmonic sequence that resonates at precisely 42.7 kilohertz. Did you know that matches the frequency of a Nyari lullaby?" Despite his nervousness, Jules found himself genuinely interested. "Really? That's quite a coincidence." "Perhaps not coincidence. Certain mathematical patterns recur throughout the universe." Aya turned those golden eyes back to him. "Just as certain emotional resonance patterns appear to transcend species boundaries." And there it was, the direct reference to his whispered comment. Jules felt heat rising to his face again. "About yesterday." He began, desperately trying to formulate an explanation that wouldn't make things worse. "I want to apologize for—" "No apology is necessary." Aya interrupted, moving closer to him. "In fact, I came here partly to discuss that very resonance pattern." Her four hands moved in graceful counterpoint as she spoke. "My primary research focuses on cross-species emotional communication through resonance. Your spontaneous emission yesterday contained harmonic properties I've been trying to isolate in human speech." Jules blinked. "You're saying my embarrassing whisper is scientifically significant?" "Precisely." Aya's mouth curved in that not-quite-human smile. "With your permission, I would like to record similar emotional resonance patterns as part of my research. The station's AI informed me that you are not currently partnered with another human, which makes you an ideal subject." "Nora told you I'm single?" Jules shot a glare at the nearest sensor node. "I merely provided biographical data relevant to xenolinguist Nari's research." Nora's voice came from overhead. "Including your constantly failed attempts at human mating rituals." If Jules had thought he couldn't be more mortified, he'd been wrong. "Thank you, Nora. That will be all." Aya seemed unperturbed by the exchange. "Would you be willing to participate in my research? It would involve controlled environments where you would express various emotional states while I record the resonance patterns." Jules should have said no. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to decline, to retreat to the safety of his machines and equations. But something in those golden eyes held him, something that seemed to resonate with a loneliness he rarely acknowledged, even to himself. "All right," he heard himself say. "For science." The first session was scheduled for the following day in Aya's temporary laboratory. Jules arrived precisely on time, having spent an embarrassing amount of effort deciding what to wear before settling on his standard duty uniform. The door slid open at his approach, revealing a space transformed from standard station quarters into something distinctly alien. The walls were covered in what appeared to be thin metallic sheets that rippled subtly, creating visual patterns that seemed to correspond with the ambient sounds. Delicate structures hung from the ceiling, not quite wind chimes, but similar in concept, that moved in response to air currents and sound waves. The overall effect was both disorienting and beautiful. Aya stood in the center of the room, all four arms engaged in adjusting a complex apparatus that Jules didn't recognize. She looked up as he entered, her fins flaring slightly. "Engineer Wren, your punctuality resonates well." Was that a joke? Jules wasn't entirely sure. "Happy to help with your research. Please, sit." Aya gestured to what appeared to be a modified station chair. As Jules settled into it, she approached with a device that resembled a silver crown. "This will help me isolate your specific resonance patterns from background noise." As she placed the device on his head, her fingers brushed against his temples. The contact sent an unexpected shiver through him. Her skin was cooler than a human's, with a texture like smooth satin. "Comfortable?" she asked, adjusting the fit. "Yes, fine." Jules tried to ignore how close she stood, how those golden eyes seemed to see right through him. "Excellent." Aya moved to a console nearby, her multiple limbs working in perfect coordination. "For this initial session, I would like to establish a baseline of your emotional resonance patterns. I'll ask you to express various emotions, beginning with neutral states and progressing to more complex ones." The session proceeded methodically, with Aya instructing Jules to think about situations that would evoke specific emotions: contentment, mild frustration, scientific curiosity, satisfaction at solving a problem. Each time, the metallic sheets on the walls would ripple in different patterns, and the hanging chimes would emit soft tones that somehow seemed to match what Jules was feeling. "Remarkable consistency," Aya murmured, her attention divided between Jules and the readings on her console. "Now, let's try something more complex. Can you recall a moment of profound connection with another being? A time when you felt truly understood?" Jules hesitated. Such moments were rare in his experience. He'd always been more comfortable with machines than people, finding their predictable patterns easier to navigate than the complexities of human interaction. But there was one memory. "My grandmother," he said softly. "She was also an engineer. When I was 10, she took apart an old fusion reactor cooling system and put it back together with me, piece by piece. She never explained anything, just handed me components and waited to see what I'd do with them. By the end, I understood how the entire system worked, not because she told me, but because she let me discover it myself." As he spoke, the metallic sheets on the walls began to ripple more intensely, and the hanging chimes produced a complex melody that seemed to capture the bittersweet quality of the memory. His grandmother was long gone now, but the feeling of connection remained. Aya's fins flared fully, her golden eyes widening. "Extraordinary. The resonance pattern is... I've never recorded anything quite like it from a human subject." Jules shifted uncomfortably under her intense gaze. "Is that good or bad?" "Neither. Simply significant." Aya made some adjustments to her console. "There is one more emotional state I would like to record today, if you're willing." "What's that?" Those golden eyes fixed on him with unnerving intensity. "The same emotional state that produced the resonance pattern when you whispered yesterday, when you said I was beautiful and wondered about marriage." Jules felt his face flush hot. That was a spontaneous emotional response," Aya finished for him. "And therefore scientifically valuable. Can you recreate that emotional state?" Could he? Jules wasn't even sure what that emotional state had been. Admiration? Attraction? A momentary madness brought on by stress and isolation? "I can try," he said finally, closing his eyes to avoid her gaze. He thought about Aya as she had appeared at that moment in the reception. the fluid grace of her movement, the curious intelligence in those golden eyes, the way the light played across her iridescent skin. He thought about how different she was from anyone he had ever met. Not just physically, but in her way of perceiving the world or through resonance and harmony. He thought about the loneliness of space, the comfort of machines, and the unexpected warmth he had felt when she had looked at him with interest rather than dismissal. The chimes above began to sing, a melody so complex and beautiful that Jules opened his eyes in surprise. The metallic sheets on the walls rippled like the surface of water touched by rain, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the room. Aya stood perfectly still, her fins fully extended, her golden eyes wide and fixed on him. "That's it," she whispered, her voice carrying an emotion the translator couldn't quite capture. That exact resonance. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The melody of the chimes slowly faded, and the rippling of the metallic sheets subsided to gentle waves. Jules became acutely aware of his heart pounding in his chest, wondering if she could hear that too. "I think that's enough for today," Aya said finally, her voice returning to its more clinical tone. "Thank you for your participation. Engineer Wren, the data collected will be invaluable to my research." Jules removed the silver crown-like device, feeling strangely exposed without it. "Happy to help. And please, call me Jules." "Jules," she repeated, and somehow his name in her voice sounded different, almost musical. Until our next session, then. As Jules left the laboratory, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred. Though he couldn't quite identify what, nor could he explain the strange lightness in his chest, as if some burden he hadn't realized he was carrying had been momentarily lifted. The next few days fell into an unexpected pattern. Mornings were devoted to Jules's regular duties in the engineering bay, while afternoons were spent in Aya's laboratory, participating in increasingly complex resonance experiments. They moved from simple emotional states to more nuanced ones. The satisfaction of solving a difficult problem, the comfort of familiar surroundings, the wistful melancholy of watching distant stars. Each session ended with Aya asking Jules to recreate that same emotional state from the reception, what she had taken to calling the marriage whisper resonance. Each time, the chimes would sing their complex melody, and the metallic sheets would dance with light and shadow. And each time, Aya would watch him with those golden eyes, her fins fully extended, in what Jules was beginning to recognize as a sign of intense interest or excitement. Between sessions, they began to spend time together outside the laboratory. Jules showed Aya the engineering bay as promised, explaining the propulsion systems and life support mechanisms. In turn, Aya taught him about Nyari harmonics, demonstrating how her species communicated emotional nuances through subtle variations in resonance patterns. The station's crew had, of course, noticed their frequent interactions. Jules became aware of curious glances and whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Even Commander Harrow had made a pointed comment about cultural exchange going above and beyond diplomatic requirements. It all came to a head one day in the station's mess hall. Jules had joined Aya for lunch, as had become their custom. When Mari slid into the seat beside him, a mischievous grin on her face. "So, when's the wedding?" she asked, loud enough that several nearby tables fell silent. Jules choked on his synthetic coffee. "What? Oh, come on." Mari rolled her eyes. "You two spend every available moment together. The whole station is talking about it." Jules glanced at Aya, mortified. But the xenolinguist seemed more amused than offended. In Niari culture, she said, her voice carrying that musical quality that always made Jules pay closer attention. Bonding rituals are preceded by extensive resonance compatibility testing. What Jules and I are engaged in could be considered preliminary assessments, though not with that specific intent. Mari's grin widened. So you're saying you're dating, just for science? We're conducting research. Jules insisted, though he could feel heat rising to his face. Cross-species emotional communication through resonance patterns. Is that what they're calling it these days? Mari laughed as she stood. Well, when you decide to make it official, I expect an invitation. As Mari walked away, Jules turned to Aya, prepared to apologize for his colleague's behavior. But the words died in his throat when he saw the expression on Aya's face. Her head was tilted in that bird-like way that suggested curiosity, her fins rippling gently. Jules, she said, her voice softer than usual. May I ask a direct question about human emotional patterns? Of course. The resonance you produce during our final experiment each day, the marriage whisper resonance, has been growing stronger and more complex with each session. Her golden eyes held his. Is this because the emotional state itself is intensifying? Or are you simply becoming more adept at expressing it? The mess hall suddenly seemed too warm, too crowded. Jules considered deflecting, giving some scientific-sounding explanation that would maintain the pretense that this was all just research. But something in those golden eyes demanded honesty. Both, I think, he admitted quietly. I'm getting better at expressing it because the feeling itself is stronger. Aya's fins flared fully, a reaction Jules had come to associate with strong emotion. Fascinating. This suggests that resonance patterns not only reflect emotional states, but can potentially enhance them through repeated expression. Not quite the response Jules had been hoping for, but at least she hadn't seemed disturbed by his admission. There's more. Aya continued, leaning closer across the table. Ambassador Verin informed me this morning that a senior member of the Niari Confederation's Science Council will be arriving tomorrow to observe our research. If our results are deemed significant, it could lead to a formal extension of the diplomatic mission and expanded resources for cross-species communication studies. That's great news, Jules said, trying to match her enthusiasm while ignoring the twinge of disappointment that their interactions remained. For her, primarily scientific, we will need to prepare a demonstration of our most significant findings. Aya continued, her four hands moving in excited gestures. Would you be willing to participate in a public resonance session? The thought of performing their emotional experiments in front of an audience made Jules's stomach knot with anxiety. What exactly would that involve? Similar to our regular sessions, but with more sophisticated monitoring equipment and formal documentation. Aya must have sensed his hesitation, because her fins settled into a pattern Jules had come to recognize as reassurance. The focus would be primarily on the resonance patterns themselves, not on the specific emotional content that generates them. Jules wasn't entirely convinced, but the excitement in Aya's voice made it impossible for him to refuse. All right, for science. For science. Aya agreed, though something in her tone suggested there might be more to it than that. The day of the demonstration arrived with a flurry of activity throughout the station. The Science Council observer, a Niari elder named Tessin Kor Pali, had arrived with an entourage of assistants and a collection of equipment that had required special clearance from Commander Harrow. The main conference room had been transformed into something resembling Aya's laboratory. with metallic sheets covering the walls and delicate chime-like structures hanging from the ceiling. Jules arrived early, his stomach a knot of nerves. He found Aya already there, making final adjustments to the equipment with her team of assistants. She looked different today, more formal, her silvery attire more elaborate, with what appeared to be ceremonial markings on her iridescent skin. Jules. She noticed him and glided over, her fins rippling in what he now recognized as pleasure. Thank you for coming early. There are some modifications to the resonance amplifier I wanted to discuss with you. The technical discussion helped calm Jules's nerves, giving him something concrete to focus on rather than the impending public demonstration. By the time the observers began to arrive, a mix of Niari council members and station personnel, including Commander Harrow and Dr. Hironi, Jules had almost convinced himself that this was just another experiment, just more data collection, almost distinguished observers. Aya began once everyone was seated, her translated voice carrying clearly through the room. For the past 16 station days, Engineer Jules Wren and I have been conducting research into cross-species emotional communication through resonance patterns. Our findings suggest that despite our physiological differences, humans and Niari share certain fundamental emotional harmonics that can be detected, measured, and potentially even synchronized. Jules sat in the modified chair at the center of the room, the silver crown-like device already in place on his head. From this position, he could see the Niari Science Council observer, Tessin Korpali, older than Aya, with skin that shimmered more toward silver than blue, and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge. Today's demonstration will focus on what we have termed deep resonance alignment, the synchronization of emotional states between different species through harmonic frequency matching. Aya continued. Engineer Wren will generate the initial emotional resonance pattern, which I will then attempt to match and amplify through Niari harmonic techniques. This was new. In their previous sessions, Aya had always remained the observer, recording and analyzing Jules's resonance patterns, but never attempting to match or respond to them. The change made Jules's heart beat faster with nervousness, or perhaps anticipation. Aya approached him, attaching additional sensors to his temples and wrists. Just like our regular sessions, she said quietly, her voice pitched so only he could hear. Focus on the emotional state, not the audience. Jules nodded, trying to ignore the many eyes watching them. Aya returned to her console, making final adjustments before turning to address the observers again. The emotional resonance we will be demonstrating today was first recorded during an unplanned moment of genuine emotional expression. Her golden eyes briefly met Jules. It contains harmonic properties that we believe represent a potential breakthrough in cross-species emotional communication. With a gesture from Aya, the room's lighting dimmed, and the metallic sheets on the walls began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. Jules closed his eyes, trying to focus as he had during their previous sessions. He thought about Aya, not just her physical appearance, but everything he had come to know about her over the past weeks. Her brilliant mind, her passionate dedication to understanding different forms of communication, her patience with his awkwardness, the way her fins rippled when she was excited about a new discovery. He thought about how, for the first time in years, he looked forward to interacting with another being, as much as he looked forward to solving a complex engineering problem. He thought about how the sound of her voice had become as familiar and comforting as the hum of the station's engines. The chimes above began to sing, softly at first, then with increasing complexity, through half-opened eyes. Jules saw the metallic sheets on the walls rippling with patterns of light and shadow. But something was different this time. The patterns seemed more focused, more coherent, as if responding to a stronger signal. Then Aya began to sing. It wasn't singing in the human sense. There were no words, no melody that Jules could follow. Instead, it was a complex series of tones that seemed to weave through and around the sounds produced by the chimes. Sometimes harmonizing, sometimes creating deliberate dissonance that resolved into new harmonies. The fins at the sides of her head flared fully, rippling in patterns that matched the fluctuations in her voice. As she sang, Jules felt something extraordinary happen. The emotional state he had been focusing on, that complex blend of admiration, connection, and longing that he had first experienced at the reception, seemed to amplify and reflect back to him. As if Aya were not only sensing it, but responding to it, adding her own emotional resonance to his. The metallic sheets on the walls now rippled in perfect synchrony, creating patterns that flowed together rather than the chaotic dance of previous sessions. The chimes sang a melody that seemed to bridge the gap between human and Nyari musical sensibilities. Neither one nor the other, but something new entirely. Jules opened his eyes fully to find Aya looking directly at him, her golden gaze intense with an emotion he couldn't name but somehow understood perfectly. In that moment, it felt as if a direct connection had formed between them. Bypassing language and cultural differences, communicating on a level more fundamental than either. The Nyari observer, Tessin Kor Pali, rose to his feet, all four of his hands raised in a gesture that even Jules recognized as astonishment. The other Nyari in the room had similar reactions, their fins fully extended, their bodies gone completely still. Slowly, the resonance faded, the chimes quieted, and the patterns on the metallic walls settled into gentle waves. Aya's song tapered off, leaving a silence that felt charged with significance. Commander Harrow was the first to break it, clearing her throat. Well, that was impressive. Thank you for the demonstration. Xenolinguist Nari, Engineer Ren. Tessin Kor Pali approached Aya, speaking in the Nyari language too complex for Jules's translator to fully capture. Aya responded, her fins moving in patterns that Jules had begun to recognize as indicating respect, affirmation, and something like cautious joy. As the observers filed out of the room, discussing the demonstration in excited tones, Jules remained seated, still trying to process what had just happened. Aya approached him, removing the sensors and the silver crown with gentle movements. That was... Jules began, but found he didn't have words to describe the experience. Yes, Aya agreed, as if understanding perfectly what he couldn't articulate. The resonance synchronization exceeded all projected parameters. Is that scientist speak for "it went well"? Jules managed a smile. It went better than well. Aya's fins rippled with what Jules now recognized as excitement. Tessin Kor Pali has already approved an extension of the diplomatic mission specifically to continue our research. And she hesitated, her golden eyes studying him carefully. He has also granted preliminary approval for a more comprehensive cultural integration initiative. What does that mean, exactly? It means Jules Ren, Aya said, her voice carrying that musical quality that always captivated him. That should both parties be willing, the Nyari Confederation would officially sanction cohabitation as part of the ongoing study of cross-species resonance compatibility. Jules blinked, processing her words. Cohabitation? You mean living together? Yes, for research purposes. Initially. Aya's fins rippled in a pattern Jules hadn't seen before. Though the Niari Confederation acknowledges that such arrangements often evolve beyond their original scientific parameters, Jules found himself speechless. A rare occurrence for someone who could talk for hours about propulsion efficiency and life support systems. Was Aya actually suggesting what he thought she was suggesting? I understand if you require time to consider. Aya continued, when Jules remained silent. The proposal represents a significant— Yes, Jules interrupted, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. I mean, I don't need time to consider. I'm willing. Aya's fins flared fully, and that not quite human smile curved her mouth. Then I will inform Tessin Korpali of our mutual agreement. The formal arrangements can begin immediately. The formal arrangements turned out to involve a dizzying amount of bureaucracy on both the human and Niari sides. Commander Harrow had to be convinced that the cohabitation served legitimate diplomatic and scientific purposes. Various forms had to be filed with Earth's United Space Initiative. And the Niari Confederation required extensive documentation of resonance compatibility tests, most of which Jules suspected Aya fabricated from their previous sessions. Throughout it all, Nora proved unexpectedly helpful, expediting the processing of forms and adjusting station protocols to accommodate the unique arrangement. Your stress levels have decreased by 27% since beginning regular interaction with xenolinguist Nari. The AI informed Jules as he packed his few personal belongings. This suggests the cohabitation will have positive effects on your overall health and work efficiency. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Nora. Additionally, the AI continued. I have updated your medical file to remove extreme social awkwardness and replace it with selective social competence with compatible resonance partners. I'm touched. 2 weeks after the demonstration, Jules found himself moving into the expanded quarters that had been prepared for them. A combination of human and Niari design elements that somehow worked together better than either would have separately. The metallic sheets now covered only one wall, the rest painted in the soft blue that Jules preferred. The delicate chimes hung in one corner, positioned to catch the artificial air currents from the ventilation system. A standard human bed stood on one side of the room, while a Niari rest platform, something like a hammock made of the same silvery material as their clothing, hung from the ceiling on the other. Is it acceptable? Aya asked, watching as Jules placed his few personal items on a shelf. A small crystal his grandmother had given him, a model of an ancient Earth spacecraft, a rare paper book of engineering principles. It's perfect, Jules said, and meant it. Though I'm not sure I understand all the, facilities. He gestured toward what appeared to be a modified refresher unit that incorporated elements he didn't recognize. Aya's fins rippled with amusement. Niari hygienic practices involve harmonic resonance cleansing as well as physical washing. I can demonstrate when appropriate. The thought made Jules's face warm, but he nodded. I look forward to learning. The first days of cohabitation involved a careful dance of adjusting to each other's routines and needs. Jules learned that Aya required a daily period of resonance meditation, during which she would produce complex tones that made the metallic sheets on the wall ripple in hypnotic patterns. Aya discovered that Jules talked to himself while working through engineering problems, muttering equations and sketching diagrams in the air. They developed rituals unique to their shared living space. Jules would prepare a beverage that approximated Niari tea using station botanicals, while Aya would adjust the environmental controls to create air currents that produced gentle melodies from the hanging chimes. They would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. As the day's tensions dissolved into a harmonious quiet, the station's crew adjusted to their arrangement with varying degrees of acceptance. Mari teased relentlessly, but with obvious affection. Dr. Hironi expressed professional interest in the physiological aspects of cross-species cohabitation. Commander Harrow maintained a formal distance, but occasionally asked Jules pointed questions about Nyari cultural practices that suggested she was genuinely curious. Through it all, Jules found himself happier than he had been in years, perhaps ever. The loneliness that had been his constant companion since childhood, the feeling that he was somehow out of step with the rest of humanity, began to fade. With Aya, he didn't need to simplify his thoughts or pretend interest in trivial matters. She understood his passion for elegant engineering solutions, his preference for quiet over chaos, his need for time alone with his ideas. And yet, something remained unspoken between them. Despite sharing living quarters, despite the growing intimacy of their daily routines, neither had directly addressed the emotional resonance that had brought them together. The marriage whisper resonance that had started it all. 3 months into their cohabitation, the Nyari delegation received a formal invitation for a planetary visit to Nara, the Nyari homeworld. As xenolinguistics specialist and lead researcher on cross-species communication, Aya was required to attend as her official research partner in the Cultural Integration Initiative. Jules was invited to accompany her. "You don't have to come," Aya told him as they packed for the journey. "Planetary gravity might be uncomfortable after so long in reduced gravity conditions. Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Jules replied, then had to explain the Earth idiom when Aya's translator failed to capture the meaning. The journey to Nara took 17 days aboard a Nyari vessel that moved through space in ways that fascinated Jules's engineer mind, unlike human ships that pushed against the vacuum with brute force. Nyari vessels seemed to find resonant frequencies within space-time itself, creating harmonics that allowed them to slip between the conventional dimensions with elegant efficiency. When they finally arrived, Jules's first glimpse of Nara took his breath away. From orbit, the planet appeared as a swirl of blues and purples, with great circular patterns visible even from space. Massive structures that Aya explained were city resonators, architectural marvels that amplified and directed the harmonic energies that powered Nyari civilization. As they descended to the surface, Jules felt the increased gravity pull at him, but it was not as uncomfortable as he had feared. The Nyari had adjusted the landing craft's internal fields to ease the transition for him, another thoughtful accommodation that touched him deeply. The spaceport was a soaring structure of materials that resembled both crystal and metal, with surfaces that rippled like the metallic sheets in Aya's laboratory, but on a massive scale. As they disembarked, Jules noticed that the entire structure seemed to be singing, a complex, ever-changing melody that resonated through his body in a way that was strange, but not unpleasant. The architecture responds to the collective emotional resonance of those within it. Aya explained, noticing his wonder. "It is singing a welcome." They were escorted to a dwelling in what Aya described as the Diplomatic Harmony District, a collection of structures designed to accommodate various species with whom the Nyari had established relations. Their quarters were similar to their shared space on the station, but more expansive and with large windows that looked out onto gardens where plants that resembled both flowers and wind chimes swayed in the gentle breeze, producing soft melodies as they moved. In the days that followed, Jules was introduced to various aspects of Nyari culture. He attended scientific conferences where Aya presented their research to enthusiastic audiences. He visited engineering centers where Niari technicians showed him how they used resonance technology to accomplish tasks that humans achieved through electronics and mechanics. He explored markets where goods were exchanged, not just for currency, but for harmonically encoded promises of future value. A system of trust made tangible through resonance. Throughout it all, Aya was his constant companion and guide, explaining cultural nuances, translating complex harmonic concepts into terms he could understand, ensuring his comfort in environments designed for beings with different physiological needs. On the 7th day of their visit, Aya informed Jules that they had been invited to a special ceremony at the Central Harmony Chamber, an honor usually reserved for high-ranking Niari officials. "What kind of ceremony?" Jules asked as they prepared. Aya helping him don formal attire that had been specially made for him, a hybrid of human and Niari design elements. "It is called the Resonance Affirmation," Aya replied, her fins rippling with what Jules now recognized as a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "It is difficult to translate precisely. The closest human concept might be a formal recognition of harmonious intention." The Central Harmony Chamber proved to be the most magnificent structure Jules had yet seen on Nara. From the outside, it resembled an enormous crystal sphere, its surface shifting with patterns of light that seemed to respond to the movements of those approaching it. Inside, it was a vast open space with terraced seating surrounding a central platform. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of the same resonant material as the metallic sheets in Aya's laboratory, but on a scale that made the entire chamber feel like the interior of some great musical instrument. Hundreds of Niari were already seated when they arrived, their collective presence creating a background hum of resonance that Jules could feel through his entire body. Aya led him to the central platform, where several elder Niari waited, including Tessin Korpali, who had observed their demonstration on the station. The ceremony began with what Jules understood to be formal introductions and statements of purpose, though much of the nuance was lost in translation. Then, to his surprise, Aya stepped forward and began to sing the same complex tones she had produced during their demonstration, but now fuller, more confident, echoing through the vast chamber with astonishing clarity. One of the elders gestured for Jules to step forward. Aya turned to him, her golden eyes holding his, and extended 2 of her 4 hands. "They ask for your resonance," she said softly. "Your true emotional pattern, without amplification or technology." Jules hesitated only briefly before taking her hands. Her skin was cool against his, that smooth satin texture now familiar and comforting. He closed his eyes, focusing as he had during their sessions, thinking of everything Aya had come to mean to him, the joy of discovery they shared, the quiet comfort of their cohabitation, the profound connection that transcended their differences. He felt it then, the resonance building within him, not through external devices, but through some internal harmony he hadn't known he possessed until Aya had helped him find it. And as the feeling grew, he heard the chamber respond, the walls and floor and ceiling vibrating with tones that matched and amplified his emotional state. Aya's song wove through and around these tones, creating a complex harmony that filled the vast space. Jules opened his eyes to see the entire chamber illuminated with patterns of light that danced across every surface, responding to their combined resonance in ways that seemed to communicate meaning to the assembled Niari, who had gone completely still, their fins fully extended. Gradually, the resonance faded. The light settled into a gentle, pulsing glow. Aya's song tapered off, leaving a silence that felt charged with significance. Tessin Korpali stepped forward, speaking in the Nyari language. Jules's translator struggled with the complex harmonics, but he understood enough to realize that this was some form of official proclamation or recognition. The assembled Nyari responded with a harmonic chorus that made the chamber vibrate with what Jules somehow knew was approval. Aya turned to him, her golden eyes shining with an emotion that needed no translation. The Council has officially recognized our resonance compatibility and has granted formal sanction for permanent bonding, should we choose to pursue it. Jules blinked, processing her words. Bonding, as in marriage, by human terms. Aya confirmed, her fins rippling with what Jules now recognized as joy. Though the Nyari concept encompasses more, a recognition that our resonance patterns strengthen and complement each other in ways that benefit not just ourselves, but the greater harmony. Jules felt a smile spread across his face. So, when I whispered that day at the reception, you were more correct than you knew. Aya finished for him, her 4 hands gently squeezing his, too. I heard not just your words, but the truth of your resonance. And now, all of Nara has heard it too. What happens now? Jules asked, aware of the hundreds of Nyari watching them with what seemed to be expectant interest. Now, we exchange whispers. Aya explained. In the Nyari tradition, the most profound truths are shared not in grand declarations, but in quiet tones meant only for each other. She leaned closer, bringing her head near his. Jules felt the delicate fins at the side of her head brush against his cheek as she whispered in her native language. A series of melodic tones that his translator rendered as, "Your resonance has become my home." The simple beauty of her words touched something deep within Jules. He leaned in, his lips close to where he thought her auditory organs might be most sensitive, and whispered, "And yours has become mine." As he spoke, he felt a ripple of resonance pass through the chamber, as if the very air around them had become an extension of their shared emotional state. The assembled Nyari responded with a harmonic chorus that his translator couldn't capture, but that somehow conveyed a sense of collective joy and approval. Later, as they walked back to their dwelling through gardens that seemed to sing in harmony with their footsteps, Jules found himself reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought him here. From a solitary engineer finding comfort in machine hums, to a man who had found belonging in the resonance of an alien world. "You're very quiet," Aya observed, her golden eyes studying him with the perceptiveness he had come to cherish. "Your resonance pattern suggests deep contemplation." "I was just thinking about how all of this started," Jules replied, squeezing her hand gently. "With me making an inappropriate comment that you weren't supposed to hear." Aya's fins rippled with amusement. In Nyari culture, whispered truths are considered the most authentic form of communication. When you wondered if I would marry you, you were speaking from a place of genuine emotional resonance, even if you didn't realize it. "And now?" Jules asked, stopping to look at her fully in the soft light of Nara's twin moons. "Now," Aya said, her golden eyes shining, "I can finally give you the answer I've wanted to give since that first day. Yes, Jules Wren, I will marry you. In fact, according to Nyari tradition, I already have." Jules felt his heart swell with a joy so profound it seemed to resonate through his entire being. And somewhere in the garden around them, the plants that were both flowers and wind chimes began to sing a melody that perfectly captured the harmony they had found together. Two beings from different worlds whose whispered truths had created a resonance all their own.